Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and returning guest Tony, who, if you remember, we just helped put on a Savage off-road front bumper on his rig. Now we're going to show you how to put a Savage off-road hybrid rear bumper on his rig. And he's also going to put a tire carrier swing out on it, which is an option that Savage offers. This video is going to be in two parts because there's going to be a decent amount of people that aren't going to have the swing out. The first part of the video is going to show you getting the main bumper on. And then if you also have a swing out like Tony, part two will show you getting the swing out connected to the main bumper and all the hardware that goes along with that. I'm going to turn it over to Tony and he's going to explain why he chose Savage and whatever else he wants to tell you.
Thanks, Tim. Once again, probably the same reasons why I chose the Savage front bumper certainly apply here as well. In particular with this rear bumper, I like the fact that it was modular. So as Tim just said, not everyone's going to want to have a tire swing out for the spare, and he allows you to do that. That was pretty cool, I thought. So in case you want to add that on later, you can do so on the left or the right side. Again, US steel, high quality US steel. Roy was one of two vendors that I found that actually said they use US steel, where others use Chinese or like Indian steel that was inferior in their estimation, and from what I read as well. So those are the main reasons. It does come, I think, like all of Roy's, all Savage products, in bare steel. So it does require some degreasing, acetone, what have you. I think I use that, and also some rubbing alcohol, and then prime and paint. And again, lightness. This was by far the lightest rear bumper out there, and I thought that was certainly a positive thing.
We're not going to show the removal of the OEM bumper because we already showed that in another video. On my 98 4Runner, I put a rear CBI plate bumper with dual swing outs, and we showed getting the OEM bumper off in that video. If you want to see that, click on the link above and you'll see in great detail how you get the OEM bumper off in preparation for the aftermarket bumper. Now let's show you what the bumper looks like and any hardware that comes with it. Okay, so here's what the bumper looks like. This is the rear view. It has a built-in hitch receiver. These are the sides. This is the top that you would actually be able to stand up on if you open the rear hatch. And the other side. These drilled holes are going to be where we're going to connect the mounting bracket for the swing out. So what Roy at Savage does for you is he has these little pilot holes where it lets you know where you need to drill the holes in case you do have a swing out. So he does this so people, if they want to later, can choose to add the swing out. So it's kind of a nice little feature he does. 4 holes on the face and then 2 holes on the top. Just like the front bumper install, Savage recommends that you do some painting to where it's going to look a little nicer when the bumper's on the rig, because there's a lot of holes in the bumper. What Tony did is he masked off the paint so he wouldn't get any overspray on the body paint, and then he sprayed it with flat black paint. What this is right here is this is a interior vent for pressure relief. When you close the doors and everything's airtight, it lets pressure escape. What most people have found out that it's really not all that necessary, and this is an opportunity for a bunch of dust and debris to get into your rig, because if the little rubber flap that goes over this vent falls out, then your only choice is either to replace the whole vent or try to replace just the flap, or you do what Tony did and he just glued a cover over the top of it to eliminate it. So you can see how he blacked everything out, and same with the other side. The instructions that you can download from Savage shows on either side you got to make some notches. So measuring from the back of the pinch weld, you're supposed to cut out this front 2 1/4 inches, so you could see like a little groove right here. We're just going to take a Dremel tool with a steel cutting blade and notch that out. Then measuring a foot from the back of the pinch weld forward, you make a mark to make the center, and then the directions say that this should be 1.5 inches wide. We measured 3/4 of an inch on either side, and then we just drew a half circle to give us a reference of what we need to cut out. So I have my Dremel tool with the metal cutting blade, and I'm going to notch out the areas that I marked. So there's the rearmost one notched out. Now we're going to work on the next one. If you didn't have a Dremel, you probably could do this with a pair of tin snips too, but because I have a Dremel, I'm going to use it. And now we have our second notch. If you wanted to, you can grab a file and smooth out the edges so they're not so sharp. And then you could also, of course, shoot a little black paint on there to protect the areas that have no paint on them now due to the cuts. So after notching out the two sections, one near the rear and then the other one a foot from the rear, Tony cleaned up the edges with the file. You could also do it with the Dremel with a little stone if you wanted to. And then he just shot it with black paint again to protect the exposed metal. Another nice thing to do, just like I did on my CBI rear bumper install, is I swapped out the rear body mounts for some solid polyurethane ones from Sonoran steel. I'll put a link in the video description to these body mounts that you can purchase from Sonoran steel. The reasoning behind them is if you hit your bumper into something, the bumper with the original OEM rear mounts could allow the bumper to come into the body. So with the solid mount, it's not going to allow that to happen, and it's going to protect your body in case your rear bumper does take a hit. And also in the CBI rear bumper that I installed on my rig, that video shows the installation of these aftermarket rear body mounts. In order to get the bumper in, we have to first disconnect this rear exhaust hanger so we can slide the bumper in, and then once the bumper is attached, we can reattach this hanger. Tony has a method that he likes using a pair of channel locks to work this rubber part of the hanger off the post so the exhaust will droop so we can get the bumper in place. Gonna spray a little WD-40 on all the posts.
Okay, there you go. Now,
once you got it past the fat part of the bottom post, you can push it off.
you got it.
Another option is, if you're not afraid of scratching up your frame, you could put a pry bar up against here to lever it, and then you could lever the pry bar forward and push the grommet off too. That's another technique you could use. Or just a big screwdriver to lever it like that. So now we're ready to get the bumper in position. We have my transmission jack sitting here, and Tony and I are gonna carry the bumper over and set it on the transmission jack, and then use the transmission jack to roll it closer to the rear of the vehicle and then jack it up into place to where we can get a couple bolts started on both sides. If you didn't have a jack like this, you could use a regular hydraulic jack with maybe put a piece of wood on it to give the bumper a bigger platform to sit on, or you can maybe just get something that you could set it up on, like some type of wood box or whatever you have. The whole idea is that you're not going to have to hold it with a lot of strength in order to get those first bolts started. If you do have a couple friends to help you, then for sure you can do that method where your two friends carried it up in place while you get underneath and get a bolt started on either side to hold it in place. So right now Tony is stabilizing it so it doesn't go into the ground. We are at a little bit of a slant, which isn't really helping us out because the jack wants to go forward, but he's holding it steady. And now I'm going to start jacking this up. I'll slide it forward a little closer. It's a little high still. Okay, once you get it past the tailpipe, now we can move it forward a little further. Now Tony and I are going to work together and try to get a couple bolts started on either side. The ones we're getting started are the ones that have a welded nut already inside of the frame rail. Those are the two we're going for. So the two bolts that we got in are right here. It's pretty easy to figure out which ones they are because they are the ones that already have a threaded nut welded onto the inside of the frame rail. So there's no way you can mess it up. This is the driver's side, and then Tony got the passenger side. For the third bolt that holds the bumper to the frame, we're going to use this nut plate, and they're site specific. On the passenger side, this is the one you would use. This cutout right here is to go around the two other bolts that we initially put in. So this has a bigger end and a smaller end. The smaller end goes in first, and so you go through the end of the frame rail, you go over the top of the bolts, and then you slide it in place. This rear nut is going to attach to a bolt that's going to go right through the back of the bumper. Then you're going to have to get on your back and line up the other one by grabbing onto this and moving it to where you can get that other bolt lined up. So I have my back hand on the nut plate and I'm lining up the hole and then capturing the threads. It helps to have a headlamp or some type of light to where you can see when the holes line up, and that's all there is to it. Now we're going to get another bolt started in the rear here. The rearmost bolt doesn't go through the frame, but it does go through the bumper, capturing that nut plate. So now we're going to do the same thing with the other side. After you get all your bolts started, then comes the point where you want to check all the gaps between the bumper and the body and try to get it equal on both sides. So the way this bumper was manufactured, the outside bar comes equal to the flare, and then we just take a look at the gap everywhere and try to make it as equal as possible everywhere on both sides. So equal gap between the bumper and the body. So now that we have the bumper where we want, we're going to get the grommet for the exhaust hanger back in position. So I'm going to slide it over the top two hooks first. Again, if your lubrication dried out, you can re-lubricate it with some WD-40 or some type of silicone grease. Then just slide it over, just like so. Now the exhaust hanger is back in position. The bumper is held onto the frame with 4 M12 metric bolts on each frame rail. They have a 19mm head, and we used a 1/2" drive ratchet with a 19mm socket to tighten them up. As for a torque spec, Savage didn't offer a suggested torque spec, but we did find that Kurt, which makes an aftermarket trailer hitch for 4Runners, suggested a torque spec of 86 foot-pounds. If you wanted a torque spec value, that might be a good value to use. Also, if you wanted some extra insurance that the bolts wouldn't be able to back out, you could use a lock washer between the bolt head and the flat washer, and also you can add some type of thread locker like a blue 242 Loctite to ensure that they can't back out. All right, if you wanted to just install the basic Savage rear bumper on your 3rd Gen 4Runner, you're all done. If you wanted to see how to get a single arm swing out onto a Savage rear bumper, continue on to part 2 and we'll show you how to get that done. This installation was pretty darn straightforward. You just have to get your OEM bumper off. You got to get the OEM trailer hitch off if you have a trailer hitch, and then you just got to do a little cutting on those driver and passenger side pinch welds, and then get the bumper in place, lift it into position, get a couple bolts started, and then you can work on getting the rest of the bolts started. Not that difficult. I'd have to say the Savage bumper is a pretty good looking bumper. Hopefully it's going to serve Tony well. With that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean, and special returning guest Tony. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Sick mods and sick bumpers.